Hey guys, it's Miss Kegs, and as promised, I'm here to make a video about my thoughts of the season finale of I May Destroy You, or more like series finale, because I don't think there's going to be a season 2. There doesn't need to be a season 2, to be honest. So I might be the only one, but when I watched it, I was confused what was going on. I was just like, somebody please make this make sense.
I don't understand it.
I do.
So guess what? Have no fear because Ms. Kegs is here to make it make sense. So sit back, relax, and just hear my thoughts. So first of all, to grasp the whole concept of the episode, we have to go back to the first episode of the series, episode 1. In the very first couple of seconds, we're in Arabella's bedroom and we see sticky notes all over the wall. And then it jumps into Arabella and Biagio. Looking back, when I first watched that episode, I didn't really understand why we were looking at the wall, but that was a setup that none of us realized. Thanks to one of my subscribers, DJ, he brought to my attention that for me to understand the conclusion, I have to go back to episode 1. And I realized that what we are seeing throughout the series was the sticky notes that Arabella had put on the wall, which is why in the finale we get different scenarios. It's her putting up a sticky note, it's her putting up a thought, and when she removes that sticky note, that thought disappears and comes about a new idea. So my very first question was, why is this episode called Ego Death? Throughout the series, there's a series title and it usually correlates to what's happening within the episode. So I was like, what's ego death? What does it represent? And what does it mean for this episode? And you're probably like, duh, Kegs, like Ego Death is the name of the bar. That's all it is. She's at Ego Death and that's why it's called Ego Death. And I was like, obviously I've thought of that, but I think it goes deeper than that. Because I was so fixated on what is ego death, I had to look it up. And I kid you not, I spent a few hours researching, looking at lectures, looking at articles, trying to understand, trying to grasp exactly what ego death is. And I honestly have a whole headache. And all I could say is these scholars have different opinions, different definitions, and it seems like they don't even understand exactly what they are talking about. But I digress. Let me just continue and summarize what I think I could summarize for you guys. So my first question was, what is an ego? So according to Google Dictionary, an ego, the psychoanalysis term, is the part of the mind that mediates between the conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for the reality testing and sense of personal identity. Parts of the ego include our self-image, our self-esteem, and our self-identity. This self-esteem helps us to classify and quantify our reality and can affect our thoughts both in the moment and in memory. Therefore, the ego may serve as a gatekeeper of consciousness, admitting into awareness only those thoughts that conform to our self-image. It's important to note that the ego can create a negative worldview and a negative view of others and self if not controlled. And we definitely saw this with Arabella when she went on her self-righteous power trip during the Halloweenish episode. The ego can also put inner pressure on us to live up to an unrealistic expectation. It skews our view of what is and what should be and takes us away from the reality of the present moment. It can be toxic. So that brings me to my next question. What is ego death? According to Wikipedia, ego death is a complete loss of subjective self-identity. So the term ego death is typically associated with people who use psychedelic drugs. Essentially, you go through a trip. This psychedelic trip causes a reduction in the self-referential awareness that defines normal waking consciousness. This causes a blurring of the distinction between self-representation and object representation and preludes the synthesis of self-representation into a coherent whole. You're probably like, whoa, Keg, slow down. What the heck do you mean? Let me tell you what I mean. In simple terms, it basically means the perceived loss of boundaries between self and the environment. So essentially, if you watch this episode and you were like, what the hell am I watching? What the hell is going on? That's the exact response that you're supposed to be getting, because she set this episode up in a way that we are on a psychedelic trip. The fact that during this episode we didn't know what was real and what wasn't, and sort of certain boundaries were skewed, certain things were changing, that is sort of like the sense of a psychedelic trip. That is the sense of Arabella going through an ego death. And this was all needed for her to face her demons under her bed, the last of them, and it was David, her rapist. So now I'm going to go into the scenarios. And before I begin, I want to get one thing straight. We all have to be in agreement on this point. In episode 11, technically, Arabella never saw David at the Club Ego Death. This was all her imagination. She did get back her memories, but she never actually physically saw him sitting there. She was only thinking about what she would do if she went to Ego Death and she saw him. So let's go into the scenarios. So I'm going to call scenario 1 an eye for an eye. I felt like everything was going well until she was beating David to a pulp. And then she tried to rape him herself, which was, yikes, not okay. Revenge is definitely a fantasy I think a lot of us think about when someone does wrong us, but does that mean it's right? With this scenario, we can definitely play with the ego idea, because essentially Arabella is or was an egotistical person. For example, we can't forget when she locked Kwame in a room with a stranger, or when, at the rape victims group, she talks about lines being crossed and boundaries being broken. Yet she breaks into Biagio's home and tries to force him to accept her. If you really sit and think about it, Bella is or was an egotistical person, and this was her peak. Bella has displayed behaviors of being self-centered. Bella has only viewed herself as the victim, and nobody else around her matters. She viewed herself as the only victim in the world, which is why I think she wrote about the second scenario. If Arabella chooses to go down the path of scenario 1, and by her taking revenge on David, even though it seems fair and it seems just, that only means is she's becoming the exact thing that she hates. Does she want to be an abuser too? Does she want to commit murder? What does that really lead to? So I think that's why she scrapped scenario 1.
Just look in the mirror, do you know what I mean? It's really uncomfortable and unnerving for everyone.
So in scenario 2, David speaks. It was really hurtful to listen to him speak, but he was essentially talking to himself, but he was basically saying all of Arabella's thoughts. He was saying the wars in Iraq, why does it matter what has happened to me or what has happened to you, calling her things like she's a whore, and it was just very hurtful and toxic, and it just really hurt my heart. The reason I think scenario 1 plays in beautifully with scenario 2 is because we see Arabella set aside her victimhood for David. She essentially humanizes him and gives him a story, and I was so bothered by this, but I think that's the whole point. How can you empathize with someone that has wronged you, that has hurt you? And I think scenario 2 was the one that hit the most for me. There is no rapist, there's no victim, just two human beings having a conversation. Thus, David tells Bella his alleged life story, and I believe this is what gives her the strength for the last scenario. So, scenario 3 was definitely odd and bizarre, and it was definitely disturbing. I'm not gonna come on here and be fake deep, be woke, whatever that means anymore. But I can't tell you what that scenario really meant. I can only give you my thoughts and opinions. And if you wanted that answer, go and talk to the writer. I do, however, believe this is where we see ego death at its final stages and where she decides to face her trauma head on. You can definitely look at scenario 3 as a role reversal, but what does that really show? Maybe it could be looked at as a merge between the both of them, with David being her trauma, and the only way for her to master it is if they become one. I don't know. Something like that. You know what? I like that idea. I like the whole merging with your trauma to become one. I think she is playing with the idea of David trying to overcome that nightmare that he represents. The next morning, after they're finished being intimate, David tells Bella, "I'm not gonna go unless you tell me to go."
I'm not gonna go unless you tell me to.
Go.
And she uses her newly gained power and comfort to tell him to go. When she speaks those words, David gets up and walks out, along with the dead corpse that she left under her bed. And that is the last of the baggage that she has been holding on to and carrying. So after all these wacky scenarios, I think we are given the most beautiful ending of them all. Sure, we didn't get the victory of Arabella getting justice, but I think we could all be content with how it ended. I think there is real beauty in the fact that she is able to accept and live in her reality. And that is the final release, where she chooses not to go and visit Ego Death, but she chooses to sit with Ben in the yard. This is her finally letting go of the past and being present in the moment and having peace with it. And that is a powerful ending to me. So that's my thoughts, and I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody that stuck around to watch my reviews and to give your opinions and your comments. I really appreciate it, and I never expect it. I really never expect that people watch my videos or talk to me. It's strange. It's something I really can't get past, but I'm very appreciative. So thank you, and I will see you when I see you. So bye.